That English guy. Are you? Is he that bad?
This is a CBS News Special Report. From Beijing, here is Susan Spencer.
The Chinese government apparently has decided to impose a news blackout on a situation over which it has no control. Government officials have just arrived at the CBS satellite transmission point. They have told us that all satellite transmission must be stopped. As you can see, entreaties are underway even as we speak. They had earlier made the same threats, made the same announcement, and showed up also at CNN's satellite transmission point. CNN briefly was off the air. Let's listen for just a moment.
That lease allows us to broadcast until 0100 on Sunday. And you're telling us we have to close down our plant now?
但是外交部批准的合同说是可以到星期天1点钟播送，下午1点。
这个问题呢，就是说你可以现在直接打电话打到外交部新闻司。
As you hear, our permission to broadcast from here extended through noon Sunday, which is 14 hours from now.
The Foreign Ministry News Department itself directly, there's been a change.
There's been a change?
From the Foreign Ministry?
Don't we have to be notified by the Foreign Ministry of the change?
是不是应该是外交部通知他们？
We've heard nothing from the Foreign Ministry.
Everything in China is done by certain procedure, and we have followed it. You can hear we are presenting this
This man
point to
represents the
Chinese
satellite company
officials.
that we've hired and brought the satellite dish here to Beijing, and he says we can still
I just
broadcast.
called the official Intelsat, which China agreed to for this particular lease. They said, per the legal agreement that the United States signatory and Chinese signatory both signed to, that we have another 13 hours to stay on the air.
按照那个 Intelsat 是不是也是那个 PDC 是在 Intelsat？
是国际的那个。
Intelsat 是那个国际的那个卫星呢，是可以还有13个小时可以播送。
对这个情况我们清楚，就是说，现在呢停止你们的地面站，你们
The
的
Chinese officials are continuing to insist that on orders from the Foreign Ministry, the satellite transmission has to end.
通过我们 PBC 帮助你们联系。
Unclear exactly what the rationale is, except that clearly the government is not very happy with the rest of the world seeing the situation here right now. We had been told we had permission to broadcast through the Gorbachev visit and then on until noon tomorrow. The Chinese government is now saying, no, your permission was only through the visit of Mr. Gorbachev. That has now expired.
You have some identification? How do I know you're
And
from
you have to go. Let's listen
the
again.
satellite firm?
你有没有什么证件呢？可以给他们看看。
I mean, anybody could come here and say they represent somebody else, and we're here to turn off your satellite. How do I know you're who you say you are?
我们来的时候啊，是这个有一名就是跟你们这儿的一个林先生是接触的，他知道我们是从哪儿来。
The Mike Lam knows who they are. They spoke to him before they came over.
But we'd like to see some identification.
Yeah, we think turning off a satellite transmission is a very serious prospect. We have a written agreement with the Chinese Foreign Ministry that allows us to broadcast until 0100 Sunday, and we think that turning off that satellite transmission would be a very serious thing.
It's a contract, and it would, in our country, it's against the law because you violated a contract.
他们说这是很严重的事情呢，因为有合同。
This was not completely unexpected on our part. Earlier today, about 45 minutes ago, CCTV, the Chinese Central Television, abruptly pulled the plug on our transmission from Tiananmen Square, where Dan Rather has been broadcasting most of the evening. That was, as you can see there, Dan was in the midst or about to begin a report, and we weren't given any warning. We weren't told that this was about to happen, and suddenly that's exactly what happened. So meanwhile, we are continuing to try to change the minds of the Foreign Ministry people who have suddenly arrived here at the CBS headquarters saying that our satellite is no longer operable, that we will have to stop broadcasting from China. The gentleman in the middle is Lane Venardos, who's in our in charge of our special events coverage. He's been in charge of the coverage here. As we said before, everything has been done strictly by the book. By the book, there is no reason for this.
Written agreement with the Foreign Ministry. I think we ought to have something in writing that says the agreement is now broken.
因为他们有书写的合同呢，他们说应该现在有一个写下来的。
The effort to persuade by an attention to detail it seems to be falling on deaf ears. I've just been told that another gentleman from CCTV is making an attempt to come into the CBS control room and shut off all of our receivers while this discussion goes on. So if we suddenly go off the air, it certainly won't be any mystery as to what's happened. These events of attempting to impose a complete news blackout follows a very ominous and strange occurrence down at the square about an hour ago. A group of helicopters, unclear whether they were military helicopters, civilian helicopters, what they were or what they were doing, but they made several flybys over Tiananmen Square, where thousands of people are still defying the government, staying in the square. You can hear the sound of ambulances and sirens that has gone on throughout the day and night. Troops who have attempted to get in the square, or at least made a half-hearted attempt to get in the square, were turned away by crowds. In fact, before they left, they ended up embracing some of the people in the crowd. So it seems that the government has decided that if it is unable to call its own troops to control its people, at least doesn't want anyone to know about it. We are now back in our own hallway here at CBS headquarters, where the negotiations with the foreign ministry are continuing. And they seem to be getting a little bit more heated. These people have told us they're from the foreign ministry. My understanding is that thus far they haven't produced any information, and as I said before, there are also CCTV, Chinese television people who are trying to get into the control room, stop the transmission from that point.
He says they have been working with Michael for a week now.
We should also tell you that the foreign ministry has been busy on several other fronts. Martial law has been imposed in parts of the capital. The foreign ministry has warned foreign journalists that they should obey the government authorities. They should not enter or leave the city, that they are under orders not to do so.
So it's up to us and the foreign ministry to talk to one another. So they have...
Betty Bowlord, a CBS consultant, who is presenting our case to the officials from the foreign ministry.
They carry the message to us.
We need to keep this going for a few minutes.
Okay. Well,
我再说一下，如果我们两个作为代表，你们不清楚的话，那责任应该是你们的那个林清盛，因为他知道，我们是作为代表到这儿，他要如果没有通知你们的老板，那责任在他。
Gentleman from CCTV is making inside the control room. It does seem that this is probably not an argument that people are going to win. On the other hand, CNN had a similar experience about a half an hour ago, and they, in fact, were off the air very, very briefly. They had only audio. Now they have returned to the air. So I suppose it is possible that there could be a breakthrough here, that they could change their minds. On the other hand, the people who are in our hallway are probably not the people who made the decision in the first place. And it appears now, as I glance over to the other screen, that CNN is under similar, in the middle of similar negotiations. So around the city, as you can see, Dan Rather just arrived.
The satellite division of the Chinese Ministry of Communications, and they're here to tell us that that we're being ordered off the air in spite of our agreement with the Chinese Foreign Ministry, which expires at 1 a.m. Sunday morning, Beijing time, that we must cease our satellite transmissions right away. And we know them to be people who have been here with the Chinese PTT, but we've asked that because we had a letter of agreement with the Foreign Ministry, that we should now have a letter of rescinding that agreement, and that we shouldn't just cut off our transmissions simply because somebody comes and tells us orally.
Well, certainly we agree with that. Does anybody speak English, or who is translating?
Betty Bao has been translating for us.
Ah, thank you. Well, first of all, greetings to our colleagues. And I'm sorry this is an awkward situation for you as it is for us. Well, that's happening. Let me explain that we were, until fairly recently, broadcasting live from Tiananmen Square. That was until late mid-morning. Now, at the first time, the camouflage helicopters flew by low over the Tiananmen Square. The first time the helicopters flew by, is when we lost our live capability at Tiananmen Square. That's about a 25-minute drive from here. This was our main headquarters in Beijing. Now, we stayed in Tiananmen Square hoping that we could get our live capability restored there. While we were trying to do that unsuccessfully, there was a second flyby of the camouflage helicopters. There were 5 the second time around. I think there were 8 the first time around. What they did the second time was pretty much what they did the first time, except they flew lower and they flew slower. The crowd, of course, was very much concerned about what was happening there. They didn't know whether someone was going to drop tear gas or make a landing, but they didn't do any of that. But when it became clear we couldn't get our live capability back up after that second helicopter flyby, at which the leaders of the protest movement in the square thought was an effort by the military to tighten a kind of psychological vice on them while the military continued trying to get their land forces into the square. At that point is when we left Tiananmen Square and came back here to our main headquarters in the Shangri-La Hotel, which, as I say, is about a 25-minute drive. The other thing that has been happening, and I don't know whether our friends here were aware of it because they've been having to do their business during the morning, is that we had this incredible videotape, incredible is the only word for it, of the various army trucks who were using restraint, the soldiers were, in trying to get through to Tiananmen Square, but neighbors and neighborhood people would come out, the supporters of the main core of protesters in Tiananmen Square. They would come out and surround the army trucks, and this is what you saw and heard, these scenes of rank-and-file Chinese pleading with the young men who are serving in their own army not to go any further. From time to time, they'd sing patriotic songs or give them flowers, and those kinds of scenes are going on all over the city. Now, what we have seen coming back, driving from Tiananmen Square to our broadcast headquarters in another part of the city, just driving over this time, is that at almost every intersection, there are crowds, but I should emphasize that both the government and the demonstrators have used a great deal of restraint. Now, where there hasn't been restraint is in this pulling the plug on our broadcast. I don't quite know where we stand at the moment here now, but they pulled the plug on us in Tiananmen Square, and these gentlemen are here trying to pull the plug on us at the moment right here.
They're just messengers.
Yes, and they emphasize that they're just messengers. Betty Ballard, who's been helping us here all week long. So, the situation is that the government and the party are making an effort to break the back of the movement for freedom, democracy, and reform. But key to that is getting the original group of student strikers out of Tiananmen Square. And up to and including now, they haven't been able to do that, although they are making these low-level helicopter flybys in an effort to, if not scare them out, at least let them know that the armed forces, under the direction of the government and the party, are trying to do that.
Dan, there's 2 pieces of information that you should know. At 10 o'clock, martial law has been declared. All foreign journalists have been barred from either entering Beijing or from departing from Beijing.
And this follows on another announcement from the government a little earlier in the day that the government would try again tonight, this will be the second night they've tried this, to impose a curfew here in Beijing. This time they're going to try to make it stick beginning at 8 o'clock. Tonight.
I believe at 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock, correct, and that'd be 9 o'clock Beijing time. But that's the situation here in Beijing. Dan Rather, CBS News. Now,
They're going to come back. We're on. Dan, go.
This is Dan Rather, CBS News, at our CBS News broadcast headquarters in Beijing. We've had the plug pulled on us from our live coverage in Tiananmen Square, and now these gentlemen who've been here for quite a while were sent, and they emphasized just as messengers, to tell us that we should stop broadcasting from here. Now, through our interpreter, Betty Ballard, we'll get brought up to date on what they say, what's happening.
Well, 你还说一遍为什么他不在？你刚刚跟我们说的。
现在就是我只转达我们上面的，就是我们头的书 口头命令。
He's just giving you the oral orders he had received from his boss.
至于你说那个书面的这些材料的话呢，我们这个同志马上打电话去给他要这个。
Because we have raised the issue of having a written statement for this, his colleague is going to make the phone call and to try to get us the written order.
And that's what his colleague is doing now.
Yes. Well, he's about to go on his way.
Yes. Well, for those who find this hard to follow, welcome to the club. It's a very confusing situation here in China, and it has been deteriorating in terms of confusion over the last 4 to 6 hours, ever since dawn arrived in Tiananmen Square, the center of the protest movement, and the People's Liberation Army had not been able to make its way to the square as the government and the party had wanted it to do, and to shut down the protest demonstration there. In these developments, elements of the People's Liberation Army have continued to try to inch their way toward the square without using violence. I think it's important to say that the Army has engaged in tremendous restraint, as have the supporters of the protest. This is not the kind of situation that we've been seeing, for example, in South Korea. Neither side wants violence. Neither side has had violence, but the Army is trying to maneuver its way, inch its way, wheedle its way to the square to break the back of the protest movement. So far, they haven't been able to do it. So they had those helicopter overflies in hopes of scattering them and scaring them, but that hasn't worked either. Now, we've just been called to the control room. Excuse me, sir, to our Chinese bureaucratic friends who are here to try to shut us down.
We have the pictures that we fed out of there that we want to put on the air.
Right. Now, what you're going to see and hear, we hope, what you're going to see and hear right now, we hope, are videotapes of some of what has been happening this morning. This is the kind of thing they pulled the plug on us in Tiananmen Square. Now, these are Army units trying to get to the square. Watch and listen to this as the people say to the Army, don't do this to your own people. And you can see how uncomfortable the soldiers are. These young Chinese dispatched from outlying provinces into Beijing to move into Tiananmen Square and try to shut down the protest movement. Watch and listen to this. The commander stays in the truck. Commander, at one point, you can see virtually has tears in his eyes, and look at that soldier in the left-hand quadrant of the screen. Now the commander smiles and is forced to shake hands. This kind of scene is happening all around Beijing today. The Army trucks surrounded, the people throw them flowers. This soldier, it's on his face. Is this what I got in the Army to do? Crowds surround the trucks manage to inch forward a little, and then they're stopped again. Now, let's go to another piece of videotape. This is a little while later, actually in Tiananmen Square. What you're going to see are the helicopters come by for the first time. Let's listen to the crowd as they see them. Camouflage military helicopters flying past the Heroes Monument in the middle of Tiananmen Square, over the Great Hall of the People. The crowd doesn't scatter. Some run at the edges, but others shout, shake their fist, and cry derision. Nobody knew at this point, this was the first helicopter flyby, whether they were going to drop tear gas canisters or let troops off or what they were going to do. Now, it was roughly at this point where, despite our agreement, the Foreign Ministry directed the state-operated radio and television to pull the plug on us when that first helicopter flyby was there. As it turned out, the helicopters made a run around the square and they swooped away. That's when the plug got pulled on our live coverage in Tiananmen Square. Now, about 20 minutes later, there was yet another helicopter flyby. Whether it was the same helicopters, nobody could say. But again, this time 5 helicopters. I think there were 8 the first time. 5 helicopters came the second time and swooped down lower at slower speed over the square. The crowd rumbled with talk that they're going to land, they're going to let troops off. They didn't. Again, they finally flew away. We were at that point desperately trying to get back on the air with our live coverage from Tiananmen Square, but it became increasingly apparent that they weren't going to restore our live capability from the square. So that's when we made a run for our main broadcasting facility some 20, 25 minutes away here in the Hotel Shangri-La. We arrived here to find the people from the state-operated, state-controlled television saying they were only the messengers, but they'd been told by the foreign ministry that they were to pull the plug on us here, despite a written agreement well in advance that we would be able to broadcast at least until 1 o'clock this afternoon, Beijing time. Now, a note has just been handed to me, which says, to recap briefly, the government continues trying to crack the back of the core of the protest movement in Tiananmen Square. It has yet been unable to do that. Dan Rather, CBS News, in Beijing, China.
This has been a CBS News special report. This is CBS.